Today is Sunday, August 30th, 2020. I am here again with Ed LaFrance, and we decided we would do a second recording talking a little bit about some of the stories from the film that we worked on in 1984 called The Devil's Gift. Some of these stories we didn't cover in our previous recording, which was actually a little bit more focused on when Ed and I first met and the films that we worked on together during the 80s and where that ultimately took us. But Ed, you had a few stories that you thought you could maybe touch on about the making of The Devil's Gift. Is that right?
That's correct, and due to popular demand, I felt that these stories needed to be told.
Right. I gotcha. Now, you've given me a list. We're going to kind of go through the list. There may be some redundancies if you've listened to the previous recording that we did together. The first, and most of these stories I don't know myself because I was only a part of this production for a relatively short period of time. Maybe, I don't even know, maybe as much as a couple of months, but you were there for, what, a year?
At least a year. Yeah, you came in at the end when we were in the big crunch to get all the post-production and special effects shots done. But I got involved in the production very early when they were still shooting the principal photography, all the live action stuff with the actors. And the reason was because in addition to the miniature work and the other visual effects you were involved in, I was brought in to do the physical effects with the principal photography. So we had some, objects moving by themselves, fire effects, full-scale stuff. And so I was helping with that. So I was involved with that phase, certainly at least a year before you got involved. But it was always understood from the beginning that the big deal for myself and for Adam, he's the one who fostered this connection with the people who were producing The Devil's Gift and got us in front of them. It was always understood that we were going to do these miniature effects for this big opening sequence, and then there are a couple other moments later in the film. So there was a meeting at the ranch, the Benton Ranch in Petaluma, when I met everyone for the first time. It was my first time to meet Ken Berton, the producer, director, writer, editor, etc., his co-producer, Jose, and then all of the principal photography crew, the photographers, sound people, some of the actors, etc. There was a group that were meeting in his house, and they all wanted to talk to myself. I can't remember if Adam was there. I feel like he should have been, but it's possible that he had already met with them, and so they wanted to talk to me, but he might have been there. But in any case, the movie Flights of Fantasy was shown to the crew.
Right, that's the Super 8 film that you and Adam made while you were in high school.
With all the low-budget special effects in it that nonetheless was kind of like our calling card. They saw that, and then there was a sit-down meet and greet. And it kind of quickly turned into kind of like a grilling. And I don't think it was intended that way. I think that, let me back up a little bit. The Devil's Gift, everyone involved was like really serious about this production. This was not something they were doing for fun. Everyone looked at it as a movie that was going to try to bring like a professional level of production, acting, directing, photography, etc. So they were all very invested in it. And they were very concerned that it be a quality product across the board. And they did not have any way to do these effects. They had not found anyone who could produce these visual effects. And then I guess Jose or Ken met Adam. They saw the Flights of Fantasy. They thought it showed some promise, but they were really worried, especially when they met me. I was about, 15 years old, I guess, at the time. I guess that's about right. So I was a kid, right? And these people were all, adults in their 30s and whatnot. So here's this kid who had a Super 8 film with some spaceships on it that he and his friend had shot with lunch money. And this was the guy that apparently the producers wanted to have do all the visual effects for this. So they sat down and started asking me a lot of very pointed questions. Questions that I didn't even have answers to because I didn't even know what we were doing yet. I understood that there was going to be some model work, there was going to be some other things, some optical effects, atmospheric stuff, but it was as vague as that. So I had no idea. They said, "How would you do this lightning effect? Tell us." And I'm like, "I don't even know what that lightning effect looks like. We haven't had that meeting. So how would you do a lightning effect?" Well, there's 1,000 ways because there's 1,000 different ways you can portray lightning on film. And we went through that with the the model work and, photography and whatnot. And after a while, I was getting really uncomfortable because I felt like, these people are basically trying to find reasons why I'm not the right choice for this project. And I don't think it wasn't like they were trying to intentionally make me uncomfortable, but at one point I got so uncomfortable that actually they said, "Look, we see you're getting uncomfortable. Understand?"
They just put a spotlight on it.
Yeah, it's like
at that point
I was kind of like the bright light in the face with the guy with the rubber hose in the background slapping into his palm. Like, we have ways of making you tell us how you'll do this. And they said, everyone involved said, "Look, we're not trying to make you feel bad. We are all so invested in this project. We want to make sure that whoever is attached to it is going to give us a quality product." I don't remember what I said, but I do remember that ultimately they decided to have us do it. But honestly, I think it was as much a case of, well, they didn't really have any other options, right?
Right.
Who else was?
That was my question. Who else were they interviewing? Well, and also the formula at the time, back in the 1980s, there were a lot of filmmakers like this that were making low-budget horror films or low-budget schlock that was a lot of times slated to go because it didn't get a theatrical release, right? It would go directly to home video.
Yep.
You had all these stores eventually, or even back then, I can't remember, but you have Blockbuster Video, you have all these sort of mom and pop video stores, and so the idea was to make a low budget horror film with the right title and the right cover art, and you would get that movie into all these little video stores that would start to generate rentals. And if you made the movie for a price and it was low budget enough, it would recover its costs fairly quickly and move into some kind of profit that the filmmakers could then, I guess, start to divvy up based on whatever their participations were. So that's probably, I'm guessing, the context for why Devil's Gift was being made, in addition to Kenny, the director and writer, just wanting to be a filmmaker.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, the home video market was burgeoning at the time, so you had the VHS rental market, you had television.
Sure.
Which for Devil's Gift actually turned out to be pretty good. And you had the overseas market.
Right.
A lot of films that would not get a theatrical release in the U.S. would go overseas where, I guess, they would pretty much take anything from the U.S., get a release there. All those things actually happened with the Devil's Gift.
What was the conversation that Adam had? So before you had heard of the Devil's Gift, or I think you said it was called the Birthday Gift before it was called the Devil's Gift.
Yeah.
So before you went out to Petaluma to the Berton Ranch to have this grilling that you went through, what was it that because Adam was the person, Adam Mose, who made the original contact with these filmmakers, and then what was that conversation he had with you before going out to Berton Ranch?
All I remember is that because he was going to the film school at San Francisco State, he was making contacts, and a number of these people who talked about John Kroll previously were producing films, independent films on their own. They were launching their own projects, a lot of them with self-financing. So he was, coming up with opportunities for us to do visual effects work. I don't remember how he specifically pitched it. I just remember that driving out, having that very, very uncomfortable meeting. I'm pretty sure Adam was there, and I think what had happened is that we were supposed to both be there to show them our film and just bask in the glory, right, of how their awe and appreciation. But he had already shown it by the time I showed up. Mm-hmm. I think I remember that now. And he later told me he felt bad about that, but they all wanted to see it, and he was really anxious to show it off. So I didn't have the opportunity of being present when they saw the film. So it was a little awkward for me walking in after the fact. They had already kind of discussed their impressions of what they saw in terms of our work and our abilities. And so I was just there now to answer questions about how I was going to do things that I didn't even know what they were yet. So it was, like I said, it was an awkward conversation, and it was like a grilling. I kind of left there feeling like, yeah, they're not going to have us do it. Yeah, they've decided we're just a couple of kids. This is not what they're looking for. But ultimately they did. And I think it's because they realized we don't really have any other options. And they saw the possibilities. They saw the potential in what we had done.
Had you read the script before you got there?
I don't think so.
Okay, so you really didn't know. You didn't have a shot list. You didn't know what they were doing.
Nope. And then from that point, I proceeded to work on the live action shooting for many months thereafter, which was start and stop, and did various practical effects with like toys moving by themselves, some fire stuff, which we talked about in the last interview. The Earth opens up and tries to swallow the hero, which we'll talk about in a minute, and other things, all leading up to all of our post-production or post live action stuff, shooting all the miniatures. All the time I was doing that. When I wasn't there doing that, I was back in my garage slowly building up, the miniature house and other pieces that we would eventually use for that shooting.
But this was a production, I think you had said it started and stopped and started and stopped, so you were literally at times waiting for more money to come in, I suppose.
Yep.
And to get a call from Ken saying, okay, we're going to shoot this scene on such and such day.
Yeah.
And that would go as long as they could pay for it, I suppose, and then the whole production would shoot down again, which was sort of something that Orson Welles used to like to do all the time as well. And that's why he made all those Gallo wine commercials, to earn money to, continue filming whatever production is.
I think they paid him in Gallo wine.
Right,
honestly, he looked like he was imbibing a lot of wine at that time, but it was like that. Yeah, and I mean, these low budget films like The Devil's Gift they couldn't pay for locations.
Mm-hmm.
They had to find some business or some residents that would be willing to say, yes, we'll let you use our location. This is why so much of the interiors were shot right on the Benton Ranch, and some of the sets that were built. There were a couple of set pieces that actually were constructed, were built right there on the ranch because that was the only place they could do it. They couldn't rent a studio, and they could not pay to use a location. So there's a fortune teller location they shot at. I was there. That was just someone who said, sure, we'll do it for the publicity.
Right.
Same with the curio shop where this demonic monkey was accidentally acquired, for the boy to make a friend out of and have his house destroyed. All that stuff was, it was wherever the people were said, yeah, sure, you can use our location, sure. Or you'd shoot in a park, sort of like Roger Corman style.
Right, guerrilla filmmaking where you just hope no police show up and ask for your permits.
Here's another place with a couple of bushes in the background that looks like where we were filming before. We'll use that to keep going. It's like that kind of thing.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, now you brought up the crack in the earth. There's a moment in the movie where the earth tries to swallow someone up, and we're going to talk a little bit about creating that effect.
So the interesting thing is that the scope of what we were doing got bigger, and one of the reasons is that a full-scale effect did not happen the way it was supposed to. So there's a climactic scene in the movie where the male protagonist is trying to get rid of this demonic toy monkey. For some reason, he drives out in the middle of nowhere and decides to dig a hole and bury it. And the monkey responds by bringing down hellfire and brimstone and causing the earth to open up and try to swallow him. And originally, the idea with that scene is they do it full scale, live action. So one of the guys who was involved in the production, who was in the movie as an actor, but also like some of the other low-budget filmmakers, he had multiple roles. He was also part of the practical effects crew. He built this crack in the earth. He created a crack in the earth out in the middle of a little gorge area on the Benton Ranch, literally by digging a trench by hand that was about 30 or 40 feet long and probably about 3 feet deep, and then installing a whole series of plywood trapdoors over that in sections, and then rigging it up in a way that he could open them in sequence so it would kind of look like this crack was sort of opening in the earth and running towards the hero, and then the hero was supposed to fall into it and face certain peril, etc. And I was there the day they filmed that, and everything was set up. They had fire trucks out there to spray water into the sky so it would fall down and look like torrential rain. And he had rigged it up so that all these doors would open in sequence, and it was all on one big cable that he would pull with his truck. So, they got the cameras rolling, action, rain happening. The guy who would rig this up, his name was Bruce. He's in this truck, he guns it, and rather than, taking off and getting this nice sequence of this crack sort of opening gradually, it's kind of like his wheels started to spin. The cable went really tight. Slowly, they kind of started to open, but then you heard some snapping sounds, and then suddenly this cable just came shooting out of this hole, hit the back of his truck with all these, supports kind of tangled in it, and the shot was kind of ruined. Mm-hmm. And something had gone wrong. He didn't know what. For whatever reason, they decided not to try that again. Maybe because they had almost killed the actor in the process.
Sounds a little dangerous.
Yeah, it sounds like it had taken someone's head off.
I love that the fire truck was out there not to actually protect anybody, but to create rain.
It was a cheap and inexpensive way because I guess Ken or someone in his family knew someone at the fire department. They were like, sure, we'll bring the pumper truck out. We'll spray the hoses in the air. What the hell? It'll be fun. Watch you make your movie. So that was another freebie. And unfortunately, they didn't retry it, so now it fell on me and Adam. It's like, okay, well, we're going to do this again, but you're going to do it in miniature. So, and we did. So in the film, at the very end, that sequence is done with a pretty large tabletop miniature, even with a little miniature, like, articulated doll of the guy, right?
Right.
And a series of shots, but they didn't do the rain effect for some reason. But it was a big addition to our work. And there's actually a picture of you, Scott, covered from head to chest
in like the paper mache or
plastic.
something. We were building like on chicken wire.
Yes,
I think,
we were building the inside of that crevice so that, with the two pieces opened up, so we could have this nice, which I don't think ever really was seen on film, this nice like view down with all these rocky walls. And so you were doing like this plaster of Paris style paper mache, and of course you were wearing most of what you were doing.
Well, it was like 100 degrees out there, I think, at the Benton Ranch.
Yep.
So it was basically spending the afternoon covered in paper mache, breaking for bologna sandwiches and a Kool-Aid, and going back out again into the sweltering heat of Petaluma and getting back to work.
Working outside, we built that outside in the front yard of his grandmother's house, which was like, that was his studio. If you remember, that's where we shot that.
Yep.
That's also where the shower scene was shot, which was a live action scene with a set of a shower that was built, where the demon tries to cook the hero alive by blasting him with hot water filled with sewage.
Right,
which was a lovely scene.
Right.
And yeah, that was like the studio, and so that became a bigger part of the project, and it's kind of significant because everything was filmed in the end in a red hot rush. Ken had rented all this equipment because he had gotten some money at the end from a distributor who wanted to get the film finished so that they could get it out there. And so he got an injection of money, but it was enough to kind of shoot all of our effects in one weekend, which wasn't enough time.
No, I remember it being a very stressful set, and people weren't very happy. It wasn't a fun adventure in filmmaking whatsoever.
There was no sleep. We were basically working.
Sleep.
Basically, that we got up that Friday morning, and we weren't done until the following Monday morning, and no one took a break.
Right.
It
was straight through,
and there was mayhem everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it was everything was going wrong. If you remember, we had these big lights, these very expensive, specialized high output lights that were called HMIs. I don't think they use them anymore because everything's done with LEDs now. But back
like
then,
10K HMIs or whatever they were called.
I don't know what they were, arc lights or what they were, but they had a special. They literally were like, they had a special starter. You had to start them up a certain way.
Right.
If you didn't, you could burn the bulb out, and the bulb was like $5,000. And I think that we burned out every one of them.
Did we?
Yes.
Good for us.
And I remember the owner of the company that rented those lights coming to Benton Ranch to have a sit down with Ken, and I was not in that, but I remember they went into a room and there was a heated discussion that you could hear through the walls because Ken was like, "This is not my fault, man. I followed your directions. I'm not paying you for $15,000 worth of light bulbs," or whatever the deal was. And there was I don't know how it finally came out, but that was, and we ended up not being able to use most of those lights. Plus, they flickered, and you can see that on the finished film. They produced a flicker. If you didn't use the right aperture angle or something, you'd get like this flickering on your film, and we got that, unfortunately.
Well, on those HMI
yeah,
lights,
you can actually see it in the finished film, especially in the opening sequence. So anyway, the Earth opening up, it just added to the pressure. We had way too much work to do in way too little time, and unfortunately the quality kind of suffered. And a lot of it was done when I wasn't even around, and when I saw the film, I was really pissed.
Oh,
I know they were just trying to get it in the can, but it did not look nearly as good as it should have. So anyway, that's the story of that.
Okay. Now, there's another sort of misadventure that took place with one of the miniatures, right? Something about a house without a home.
Yeah.
What was that? What was that episode all about?
The star of this all these model effects was this Victorian house that's in the opening sequence.
Right. The one that gets blown up in a giant fireball.
That's where the demon that inhabits the toy monkey is called up from the depths. And so it's a long sequence, and it ends with, the lightning strike and the house burning to the ground, and etc. And so that was one of the first things I started building, and it took a long time because I was spoon-fed, like a few bucks at a time for materials. I started building it in my garage, and then when my mother moved, there was no place for me to do it, so then Bruce Again, the guy who had done the earthquake effect, he rented a garage in Berkeley where he used to keep his tools because he was a carpenter, and he said, you can work on this in my garage. It was a garage. There was no toilet. There was no water. It was just like someone's garage that he rented for like $75 a month. And I moved everything there and built it. Then at some point, he moved the model when I wasn't even around to the Benton Ranch.
Okay.
Damaging it in the process, but it was an honest mistake.
To the barn, to the horse barn.
He moved it to the horse barn.
Right, okay.
And they left it there for a while. And this was probably some weeks before we all went out there in that final push to put it all together that one summer. So it was sitting there for who knows how long. I walked out there, and apparently what had happened is some of the chickens on the farm had moved into the house while it was sitting in the barn. And I don't know who found it. Adam and Ken knew about this. They thought it was hilarious. And they got to break the news to me. He's like, hey, you've got some tenants in the house now. And there actually was like a nest and like some eggs. And, they had kind of damaged it a little bit, but not too much. But they thought this was just the funniest thing, that this model that I had put so much effort into was left in this barn, and these chickens had basically used it as a home and pooped on it and laid eggs in it and stuff like that. And so then I had to kind of repair the damage that had happened over all that time. But it just kept moving around. Then finally it moved into that one place where barn where the barn that was the studio, the nature studio where we finally filmed it. But yeah, it just kept moving around because it was a low budget production, and everything was like, what can we use for free today? Okay, that's where we're doing whatever we're doing.
And it wasn't exactly a small set that we put together. It was fairly sizable. It would take up a pretty substantial amount of space.
It's about 20 feet wide by maybe about 15 or 20 feet deep.
Yeah. Well, at least the damage was nothing that a hot glue gun couldn't tackle.
Yep. Hot glue gun and some well-placed
and some popsicle
shrubbery
sticks, I think. I remember working on the fence. Every time I watch that sequence, I'm paying attention to the fence because having no skills with a hot glue gun and popsicle sticks, I think that sort of became my responsibility. Build the fence. Like, look, you can't do anything. What are we going to have them do? Just give them the fence. Give them the fence.
And so much of that work was done by hand. We had very basic tools, so it was like you were whittling every little fence,
every little thing,
every picket fence post by hand. A lot of work.
Okay, now one of the stories that you had mentioned to me at one point that I thought sounded pretty interesting, but I don't really know the details to, were that Ken at one point had hired 2 cinematographers, usually, or directors of photography, usually on a movie. Typically you only have 1, but for some reason he had 2. What was that story?
So this is when I was working on the live action part of the photography, the principal photography. And so I was, obviously I was one of the newer members of the crew. And we were filming, I think, actually on the Benton Ranch this one day. And so there were these 2 women, each of which seemed to kind of, at various times, take on camera duties. Either running the camera, setting up the camera, working with the lighting team, figuring out the framing of the shot. And I always thought it was just sort of like they were a team, but they actually, at one point, that one day, they got into an argument between the 2 of them of which one of them was the cinematographer or director of photography. Each of them was saying, no, I am the director of photography. Another one would say, no, you're mistaken. I'm the director of the photography. You're the camera operator. And so it went back and forth like this. I'm just witnessing this argument, not knowing, what is going on here. And
it's pretty heated at this point, right?
It gets a little heated. Let's just say it's not screaming, but there's a chill in the room, okay? And so I don't remember, maybe we broke to take a break or something. Some of the other crew members filled me in and said, yeah, this has been going on for a while. And so each of these women, and there was 2 of them, thought that they were the DP, the director of photography, and the other one was just a camera operator, and so that other one was working for them. So each thought they were in the lead role, thinking the other was in the subordinate role. So what eventually came to light is that Ken had apparently at 2 different times had either directly or indirectly led each of them to believe that they were, in fact, the director of photography, and that the other woman was a camera operator who was working for them. And I guess he either hoped or prayed that this would never come to a head on the set, which of course it did. That created a real serious rift, and it actually stopped work for a little while. And eventually what he did is his novel solution was to say, okay, well, you're both equal but different. He said, so one of you is the director of photography and the other one is the director of cinematography. And so you each will have equal roles and will divide up the work or something like that. And
some crazy convoluted
that was never going to actually work, but
right.
It satisfied at that moment. It was enough to lay that feud to rest, but there was always kind of like a tension between those two people. Ultimately, in the whatever he may have promised them, I note that in the credits of the film, one of them was actually credited as the cinematographer, and the other one was credited for additional cinematography. That's the way it happened in the credits. But so yeah, they were laboring for quite some time, each of them under the delusion that they were in charge, where in fact the other one was also laboring under the delusion that they were in charge. And this was just kind of part and parcel of the sort of chaos we were seeing all the time. And this happens all the time in these small productions, you know.
Right.
A lot of people wearing a lot of hats.
So essentially, The Devil's Gift has no director of photography.
You might even argue that it had no director. But yes, it was that. That's exactly what happened.
Right. That's the solution.
But you know, to their credit, somehow they worked it out and it got done. But yeah, there were some exciting times on the set because of that conflict.
Interesting. Okay. Now, there was another story you had told me about some guy or guys that came from Hollywood. What's that story?
So, yeah, and I don't know if I touched on this the last time we recorded this. So, when we got to the very end game where we were shooting all the special effects and we had that big weekend, part of it involved doing some pyrotechnic effects. Now, I always wanted to do that. I was all about fire in my adolescence. And had been doing I did all the pyrotechnics for Flights of Fantasy,
right? Where you essentially burned down a house.
Yep,
in the story.
Yes, and may have actually burned down a real house, though.
We're not going to talk about that.
You can't prove it. No. Those records are sealed. And so I was certain from the beginning in my mind I was going to do the fire and explosion and smoke effects, everything relating to that for Devil's Gift. But it turned out actually that Ken. At whatever point, he decided, no, that's not the case. He now had money. As I mentioned before, a distributor had injected some funds to get the film finished so he could get it out there. And so Ken decided to hire a Hollywood pyrotechnics team to do this. And, well, in fact, one guy, because that's what he could afford.
I remember like a big truck showed up, like a 18-wheeler or some trailer or something showed up. That I think had... Well, I remember because they had all the signs on the side of the trucks for explosives and...
So, I think, you know, this is what time does to you. They're a big truck, an 18-wheeler, or like a cab truck with a cargo trailer behind it did show up, but that was the lighting equipment.
Oh, that wasn't the pyrotechnics?
That was those HMI lights and all the stuff that he
got it, okay.
The pyrotechnician showed up in a van. And the van did have their actually it was unmarked, but their license plate had their company name on it. He showed up in a van. This was I'm not going to name the name, but this company at the time in the 80s, they were working on the Star Wars films, the Star Trek films, Ghostbusters, any Hollywood, epic that had fire and explosions, miniature or full scale. They were doing that stuff. So he hired a legit, show business pyrotechnician to do this, much to my chagrin, because I was like, I can do this. We don't need to spend this money. Give me the money. I'll do this. So the guy showed up, and we shot some effects, and we broke for lunch, which he was under the impression, since he'd worked on actual real films, that lunch meant some caterer was going to come in and ask you, how do you want your steak?
Right.
Which is like a little champagne with that. But what we said is, no, we're going up the hill because Grandma made us some bologna sandwiches and some Kool-Aid and some barbecue flavored potato chips. And he was kind of like, oh, okay. So we all, we had to drive up the hill. We're at the bottom of the Benton Ranch shooting this stuff. We got to go up to the top of the hill. That's where the house is, where we can get our sandwiches. So we get piled into 3 or 4 cars. This pyrotechnics guy gets in a car with Ken, with Adam, maybe one other person. That was their group. As soon as the doors close, he turns to Ken and he says, "Where's the Coke?" Because apparently in Hollywood, there's going to be Coke.
In the 1980s.
Yes.
That's,
that was sort of like, you had Coke, and also you had Coke and Pepsi, but mainly you had the white stuff.
I don't think he meant Coke and Pepsi.
No, he was not talking about that.
No.
And I wish I had been there. Adam told me this story, but it was something along the lines of Ken looked at him like a deer in the headlights and said, "Oh, yeah, no, we don't have any cocaine. Really sorry." Or maybe he even thought the guy wanted soda. But so that was the first big letdown for the pyrotechnician. The second big letdown was when we got to Grandma's house and we all sat around her Formica table and ate our bologna sandwiches and Kool-Aid. He actually was in pretty good humor about it, but I did note that the after lunch work session was fairly short, and then he's just sort of handed us the rest of the pyrotechnics. He gave us some powder and some fuses and said, "Here, you guys can sort of finish this yourself. Why don't you write me my check, and I'm going to get out of here."
Right.
Because this was not
not a fun production.
This is
for him.
not this was not the show he wanted to be on. Right? There was a show somewhere else that had something for his nose that he wanted to imbibe in. So we were done. And so actually at the end, it was me who and you guys, we burned down the house, right? Mm-hmm. And we finished up the rest of the effects. But he created those gigantic, way oversized explosions for when the lightning hits the house. That
exactly.
Ridiculously too big.
Right.
So
okay,
he went big.
Now there's another story of a burned house. I think a strange story of a burned house, and what took place there?
So when I started working on The Devil's Gift, I was living in Santa Rosa, which was due north of Petaluma.
Right, like an hour or
no,
half hour?
Half hour, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe 15, 20 miles.
Okay.
So the way you'd normally, for me to get to the Benton Ranch, I'd drive down 101 South, Petaluma, turn into Petaluma, get on the Bodega Highway, and take that due west. And their ranch was right off Bodega Highway. I've driven by it since then, though I don't think they're there anymore. And so it's kind of like an L-shaped path. And then at one day, I figured out, this is kind of a long way. I found a road that sort of did the hypotenuse of the triangle. I could get off the highway earlier and take a diagonal path that pretty much dumped me out on Bodega Highway right there at the ranch. Saved myself several miles. So I started going that way. And like the first or second time I went that way, I'm driving along. I happened to look to the side, and there's this house. And that son of a bitch looked just like the model I had built. Now, I'd never been there before. Ken never provided any artist renditions of what he wanted. He described to me what he wanted this house to look like, and it was kind of a Victorian style with these ornate wood, cornices and a peaked roof, and then this tower that sort of stood off from the house, and it was like this freestanding tower room. As you remember, that's the way we built it. There it was.
Wow.
There was an actual house that was built exactly like it. It was a different color, but other than that, I'm like, this must be it. I thought to myself, Ken probably drove this road many times. He saw this house. He's like, that's what I want it to look like. So I just kind of didn't think much about it. And we, time went on. I moved out of the area, but we finished the film. We blew up the house. We burned it down.
Right.
And then for some reason after that, like just a couple days after that, I took that route again. And I don't remember why, because I wasn't living in Santa Rosa anymore. But I went that same road, and the house had burned down.
You're kidding.
No. I shit you
This
not.
is a couple of days after
just
wrapping up production.
We were there to clean up and get out. It was just a couple of days. I literally stopped the car.
Wow.
I was so shocked. And I got out and I just stood there and I looked at him like, this can't be happening. I'm like,
there was a burned out field
there was the remains of the house were there, but you remember the stuff we shot, it was literally like it had happened.
Wow.
And I actually was kind of freaked out by it. I'm like, what are the chances of this happening? And I remember telling Ken about it, and I think I told Adam about it, and they thought it was interesting, but I think you kind of had to see it for the shock. I mean, that really kind of rattled me. It's like, you hear about cursed productions,
exactly.
like Poltergeist
right.
and other movies where it's like, I was wondering if maybe we had brought this curse, by manifesting all this stuff, somehow we brought this curse on this house that Ken had seen and was sort of the inspiration. It had come to full circle. I don't know.
Interesting.
I hope that no one died in it, but that was a really weird and kind of freaky experience.
And you never found out what the story was behind that house and what took place? No? Okay. That is very strange. And what's also very strange is that no one saw any money from this film. I think when we were in production, certainly, when you're on production on low-budget films, there's this sort of general feeling that at some point everybody's going to see a little bit of money.
Yep.
And that oftentimes would drive the crew and drive everybody, and people would work really, really hard to make the film as good as they can, because hopefully that would translate into box office dollars, and hopefully that would translate into people seeing some money down the road. And when it came to The Devil's Gift, that was certainly what we were operating out of. And then, of course, Devil's Gift got, the photography finished. It went through post. It got completed. There was distribution in place. And what happened?
So, yeah, we all had those deferred participation contracts that promised us points, right, on profits. And I think it was net profits. Maybe somebody had gross. I don't remember. I think I had a few points in net profit. And, yeah, you think... especially when you think you've got something good or at least marketable, you're like, wow, this could really happen. And then a distributor picks up the film, gives you money to finish it, and he says, I've got distribution channels. You know, I got video, I got TV, I got foreign theatrical markets, because it would never get released. A film like this would not get a domestic release, but it could get a foreign release. And all those things happened. You know, it ran on USA Network, which I don't know if it's around anymore, but they used to run a Saturday night horror feature. Like every Saturday night they ran a horror movie. They ran this thing like every 2 weeks for like a year, you know. And it was on Vestron Video, so you can get it, you can rent it or buy it, and it played in several overseas markets, and it made some money. And, you know, we were all getting really excited. We're like, wow, it finally happened. The system worked. We're going to get paid, because we were waiting for that to get our deferred payment. And then I called or got a call from either Ken or the distributor. I talked to both of them, both the guy who ran the distribution company and also Ken. And I don't remember who spoke to me first, but they said, well, got some good news and some bad news. The good news is this thing's made some money, and I could actually cut you guys some checks. The bad news is the lead actor and actress have sued to get all of their money, their entire participation, before anyone gets anything, because they're the stars, and in their minds, or at least what they're asserting, is they're the reason why this film's been successful.
Sure.
So therefore, they deserve to be first in line. They get all they can eat before we get anything. And so they've taken it to court. Two of them together, pooled, got a lawyer. He's tied the whole thing up. All the money's frozen. And he's like, and then I remember specifically the distributor. I can't remember his name. Something Kaplan, I think. He said, "I'd love to pay you guys, but I can't." He says, "I am frozen. The money's frozen." And I'm like, "Oh, this is a lovely state of affairs."
Sure.
And I also remember talking to Ken, and he was really pissed. He's like, "Yeah, they got greedy." He's like, I'm screwed, and everyone's screwed." And that was, you know, maybe, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months after the film was finished. And after that, I just, in a state of sort of disappointment and disillusionment,
Sure.
I just never followed up. I don't know what happened with their lawsuit.
Right,
I don't know if it
right.
was ever settled. I don't know if any money ever came out of this thing. I never would have gone and gotten a lawyer. You know, these things were almost like you sort of wrote them off. These little independent films with these deferred participation contracts. You were like, yeah, you're just kind of doing it because you said to say that you did it,
right? To build your reel and your resume and your experience,
yeah,
and
look, it's on video.
You know, we blew up a Victorian house that similesly somehow also burned down a real house that looked exactly like it.
That's an added bonus. Yeah, we had a credit, and so you were just next one. Maybe it'll work out better on the next one. That just had to be the attitude. But yeah, it was unfortunate. It wasn't like it would have made me rich, but it almost would have. It would have been like validation.
Right.
You actually get a check, even if it was just for $1.
Right.
You'd be like, I got paid for my work.
Sure, yeah.
And that just never got to happen, unfortunately.
Well, and at the time, look, there was no YouTube. There was, all we had were videotapes.
VHS.
I never heard
TV.
anything about The Devil's Gift. I never saw it. I didn't know where to see it. But now it's available. I can go and take a look at it. I think I have 3 separate credits on it or something. I'm going to take a look again.
Had multiple
We
hats.
have multiple credits for some reason.
Yep.
I didn't see a dime. You didn't see a dime. But certainly The Devil's Gifts, continued to be kind of center point for our friendship, at least, because we had gone through that adventure together. And it's something fun to look back upon and reminisce about what we went through, and just the ridiculousness of getting that film made was both horrifying and hysterical. And so we got some good stories out of it at the end of the day, and frankly, I couldn't ask for more than that. So Devil's Gift, yeah. Check it out if you get a chance. Again, it's on YouTube, and I suppose you could probably buy it somewhere. I've never checked iTunes.
Please buy it. Maybe I'll get a residual check.
I have no idea if it's even purchasable anywhere.
Yeah.
Usually when things get dumped entirely on YouTube, where you can watch it for free, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to make any money on it. But I enjoyed my time. Thanks for the call to come out to the Petaluma Horse Ranch and spend a little time out there with all the weirdness. I would have never believed it myself had I not actually been there. And what are your sort of final thoughts about now, years and years later, having gone through the experience? And you went through it a lot more than I did. You went through all the principal photography and production and craziness. Where does the Devil's Gift kind of live in your mind?
The memories are great. They have a lot of great nostalgic value, and I'll always remember the experience, right? For what, like you said, the experience was fun to have gone through. It was bonding in a lot of ways. You got dragged into it. You're not the only one. I dragged other people from the San Francisco community.
And do you still talk to them, or do they not take your calls anymore?
Most of them I burned most of those relationships. But I mean, friends from that I went to school with were involved. People from the San Francisco film community were involved. I mean, I met people that I got to exploit again. For Star Worms. It was a fun. It was a fun time.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that's a period of time that will never really be repeated.
No.
The way that the film industry was working, the independent film industry, what home video and cable television, the way it was changing the industry. I mean, you kind of went through a second wave of that with the internet, but it's not quite the same.
Well, everything's digital now, so like a lot of those effects, you wouldn't need guys out in a horse barn, with a hot glue gun and popsicle sticks putting together a Victorian house. A lot of that can be built in computers now and can be blown up in computers, and you don't have to do all that practical filmmaking. We were also shooting on film, by the way.
Yeah.
And you don't really do that anymore. So there's a lot of filmmaking experience that we got to have that pretty much current film students or the younger film generation would never even know what any of that is.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's the idea that you needed to get a film seen, you needed a distributor. You needed someone who had the connections and the channels to get it on the home video circuit or the TV circuit or the theatrical circuit. There wasn't some creator space where you could upload it and then tag it or post it on
send it out to
media.
Germany or somewhere like across the globe.
Yeah.
You actually had to have a print made if it was going to show in a movie theater, which is another $2,000 cost to strike a print like that and send it out wherever. If it's in other foreign film markets, then you're talking about you've got to either put subtitles on the film or you got to translate it or something and do the dubbing. So there was a lot more that had to take place that nowadays, in theory, you can do so much more instantly that we just didn't have those options back then.
So way back when we were making Flights of Fantasy, me and Adam, back in like 1980, and we were sort of like in the first part of it, putting the stuff together, and we would talk a lot just about the state of filmmaking and technology and stuff that we had learned. And Adam said something to me that I never forgot. And he said, in just now he was a little off on his time frame, but he wasn't off with the idea. He said, all this stuff that Ed, that you've learned, models and actual photography on film and the optical techniques and animation, the way that it, he said, in a few years, computers are going to replace all that.
Sure.
None of these skills will be needed anymore.
No. Mm-mm.
He said anybody will be with a sufficiently powerful system will be able to create all this out of nothing using computer technology. And I thought that was a really depressing thought to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, one of the things that attracted me to filmmaking and visual effects was the skill set required. That it was
Sure.
kind of like being if you could do something that was really convincing or at least decently convincing, it was kind of like it was like a skill set. You were almost like a magician. You had perfected a skill that allowed you to create this illusion that would fool people. And it wasn't easy. It took practice and a lot of trial and error and a lot of effort. And in the case of the way we did, it also took money.
Money, manpower. I mean, it was a lot of people involved.
It wasn't a case that everyone could do it.
Yeah.
It was a case that those who really tried hard and had the means and the skill could do it. That was kind of what attracted me to it. And now we do live in this era where whether it's visuals or music or whatever it is, we've got this digital medium, this forge, wrought of bits where you can just kind of create anything. And we live in this realm where anybody can create anything. That doesn't mean it's good, but they can do it. So the bar has been lowered to the point where pretty much anybody could just kind of crawl over it and be there. And that to me no longer holds any interest. And that was what's different. Adam was actually right. He was off by a few years, maybe 10, 15 years, but he was right. And so in a lot of ways, I'm kind of glad that I stopped when I did, because I would have ended up just a few years down the road after having invested a lot of time in a career, disillusioned at the end.
Sure.
Seeing all the things that I know being replaced by computer graphics and me just being not needed anymore.
Right.
And just feeling like, I don't even want to participate. Even if I could do it, which I probably could, I don't want to.
Right. Because even what you were doing with building models, now you have computer-generated 3D modeling that, you can bring the viewer through, right? It's all done on computer. There's no real sort of craft involved in terms of like cutting balsa wood and distressing the wood and making it look like the real version that you're trying to recreate. You're not creating earthquakes out of paper mache. It's all sort of in the computer, and the programmers are sort of now putting that together.
Yes, yeah. Desk jockeys.
Very different world, yeah.
Very different.
Yeah, very different experience altogether. Cool. Well, thanks for reminiscing about all of the stories on Devil's Gift. Maybe if, I don't know, the handful of people that listen to this and know Devil's Gift will have a little bit of added commentary on top of the movie that you can see for free on YouTube. Something that, unfortunately, Ken Berton was not able to do himself, I assume. I'm guessing there is no commentary track about Devil's Gift.
No, and I think that if we ever decide that there's a reason that we should do this again, that's what we should do.
We should just sit down and do the commentary track?
And do the commentary track.
Yeah.
And I'll share everything I can possibly remember. You'll do your part as well.
Okay.
Perhaps we could even get a third party involved.
Yeah.
And just turn it into, the ultimate memoir.
Right.
Of the making of.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll start something new. Just people that happen to work on a film they'll create their own commentary tracks somehow. We'll figure out how to do that.
That's actually a great idea.
It is, isn't it?
I love that idea.
Because it doesn't matter. You don't have to be the writer, the director, the stars, nothing. You could just be, like me, a guy with a hot glue gun and popsicle sticks. I don't know who wants to hear that commentary track.
Stick. That one was
That's
mine.
how I built that fence.
I recognize
That's the
that
one.
stick. Yeah.
Oh,
I almost gagged on that
after
one.
we blew up the house with the pyrotechnics, I remember I had built this gate. And the gate, if I remember correctly, is featured in the opening shot.
Woohoo!
And every time I see the gate, I'm like, that's my gate. And once we blew up the house, that thing just obliterated everywhere. But I ended up finding intact that gate. The gate actually survived the explosion, and I remember I kept the gate. Now, I don't know where that gate is today, but for years I had that gate that I had built that ended up getting photographed and ended up in the movie, and I had that little piece as a memento. Maybe one day, it's probably in storage somewhere or whatever, I'll stumble across the Devil's Gift gate.
That would be awesome.
And I'll frame it.
That means is we can actually start a museum, like a traveling road show. It'll just be the gate. So the rest of it will just have to be like blow up pictures and stuff.
We can try and track down all of the pieces.
We may have to go to the Berton Ranch,
recreate,
and actually do like some excavation, sort of like an archaeological dig.
Right. We'll recreate. We'll get a horse barn. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Ed LaFrance, thanks so much for talking us through your experiences and stories and background on Devil's Gift. This was a fun conversation, and who knows? Hopefully, there'll be more to come.
All right.
Okay.
You're welcome. Awesome.
Thank you.
You bet.